Hi guys, welcome to part 3 of As You Like It. So we just left off in the last video drawing Oliver and his brother Orlando, Oliver and Orlando. Okay, Orlando and Rosalind have a thing for each other, so that's why we drew an arrow and some hearts. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Orlando soon reached home. Adam, an old family servant, stopped him from entering. "Your brother this night means to burn the lodging where you lie, and you within it," the servant warned. He told Orlando that Oliver was in a jealous rage over his brother's wrestling triumph. Adam himself did not want to stay with such a cruel master. The old servant and the youth fled to the nearby forest of Arden. So, Oliver, Orlando's brother, Oliver, is very jealous that Orlando won the wrestling tournament and is planning to burn down where he's staying as well as killing him. And his servant doesn't want to work for someone who's like that, so he's going with Orlando and staying somewhere else. It says they fled to the nearby forest, so that means that they ran away. And they're going to stay in the forest, okay? Back at the palace, Rosalind was also the target of a jealous rage. Frederick was angry at the sympathy and pity she received from his subjects, especially as more and more of them left to join her father in the forest. So Frederick is not happy that Rosalind is getting all this pity because, remember, Frederick took Rosalind's father's place in the kingdom and banished her father. So people feel sorry for Rosalind and are treating her with pity. So they're saying things like, "Oh, poor Rosalind, that's so not fair." And Frederick doesn't like it because he wants people to be on his side and think that everything he does is fair, which it obviously isn't. He's selfish, right? Because he wants to rule the kingdom, even though it's not really his to rule. It's his brother's. Okay. "Get you from our court," Frederick commanded his niece. "If thou be found within 20 miles of here, thou diest for it." So now Frederick just told his niece, Rosalind, that if he sees her in his court or in his kingdom, then he will kill her. So she needs to run away right now. Rosalind was shocked at her sudden banishment. Celia was outraged, so Celia is not happy. "I cannot live out her company," she told her father. Both girls then secretly packed their fine dresses and jewels. Celia also took a quantity of gold. They planned to seek out the rightful duke in the forest of Arden. The cousins prepared disguises appropriate for country life. Celia dressed as a shepherdess and called herself Aliena. Did I say it? Aliena? I think so. So let me add that real quick. So Celia is Aliena. Spelled Aliena. So Aliena. Okay? Thinking they would be safer if one of them appeared to be a boy, Rosalind donned male clothing and posed as Ganymede, Aliena's brother. Under cover of night, they stole out of the palace. So, Rosalind is Ganymede. Ganymede. So you spell Ganymede, G-A-N-Y-M-E-D-E. Ganymede. Okay? Alrighty, so, and now they ran out into the woods. When dawn broke, Celia and Rosalind were deep within Arden Forest. They were enchanted by its woodland beauty. They were also hungry and exhausted. Fortunately, they stumbled upon a shepherd with a cottage for sale. Celia gave him the gold she had carried from the palace. Then the cousins set up housekeeping in the little house in the woods. Orlando and Adam had also traveled all night. So remember, Adam is the servant right, that does not want to work for Oliver anymore. So Adam and Orlando both left and are in the forest. So they traveled all night. They reached another part of the forest. The old man was faint with hunger. He could go no farther. Orlando, pledging to return with food for the faithful servant, set off. His search brought him to the forest court of Duke Senior. Since his brother had deposed him, Rosalind's father had lived in Arden with a band of loyal lords. So depose is just another word for saying banished, right? They wore rough woodsman's clothing and hunted their own food. Yet they lived a noble life in the wilderness, learning life's lessons from nature. This day, as the Duke and his men sat down to their luncheon banquet, Orlando burst upon them, sword drawn. "He dies that touches any of this fruit, till I and my affairs are answered," he cried. "As you will not be answered with reason, I must die," answered, oh gosh, how do you say this? Jacques, a witty, cynical lord of the Duke's court. Duke Senior offered a plate of grapes to the wild-eyed young man. "What would you have?" he asked. "Your gentleness shall force more than your force move us to gentleness." How interesting. So Orlando, right, is needing food. And so he came upon Rosalind's father. He doesn't know it's Rosalind's father, though. He just sees Rosalind's father and all his men, and is trying to get them to give him food. But he's using force, right? And so, Duke Senior, so Rosalind's father, is the one who talks to him and says, "Look, if you just ask us, we'll give it to you. Your force is not really helping you." Embarrassed, Orlando lowered his sword. "Pardon me, I pray you. I thought that all things had been savage here." So he's saying that because everyone looks like they're living in the woods and they're homeless, he thought he would need to use force to get what he wanted. When he explained his situation, the Duke told him to fetch Adam to the feast. Oh, so it's very kind. So, Duke Senior is telling Orlando to go get Adam, the old man who was working for Oliver, right, and bring him to eat with them. The Duke recognized at once that Orlando was a gentleman out of favor with fortune. "Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy," he told his lords as they waited for the two travelers to return. "This wide and universal theater presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in." Interesting. So the Duke's men agreed. "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players," said Jacques. "They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." So basically he's saying, it's a metaphor, right? All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. So the whole world is a stage, and everyone plays their own part while they live their own lives, right? Orlando returned, carrying Adam on his back. The Duke was delighted to discover that Orlando was the son of his old friend, Sir Roland. The two men spent a pleasant meal exchanging compliments and stories. Meanwhile, their brothers had a far less cordial meeting. So, I guess the Duke also knows Orlando's father, and he liked him. So remember, Orlando's father was Frederick's enemy, but Duke Senior's friend of some kind. Well, I don't know, but they weren't enemies. Frederick was enraged when he found out that his daughter was gone. He was desperate to find Celia. A maid had overheard the cousins talking with Orlando after the fight. Frederick suspected that the young man had helped the girls escape. He summoned Oliver and demanded to know the whereabouts of his brother, Orlando. Oliver swore he hadn't seen his younger sibling since the wrestling match. Frederick was unmoved, so he doesn't believe him. He seized Oliver's property and banished him until he brought Orlando to the palace. After making inquiries about Orlando, Oliver headed toward the forest of Arden. So now Frederick told Oliver that until he finds his brother Orlando, he's going to keep his whole property. So Oliver has to go look for him. Meanwhile, Orlando quickly adjusted to life in the Duke's rugged but noble woodland court. Still, he would have traded all his pleasant hours there for 5 minutes in Rosalind's company. Whenever Orlando was alone, he pressed Rosalind's necklace to his lips. As his yearning grew, it flowered into poems. So Orlando is very poetic when he has a crush on somebody. Orlando wrote line upon line of heartfelt rhyme, unschooled but full of passion. He nailed these poems to tree trunks for miles around. "Hang there my verse in witness of my love," he said. He carved his true love's name on other trunks. So he's carving Rosalind's name into tree trunks. "Oh, Rosalind," he sighed, "these trees shall be my books, and in their barks my thoughts I'll inscribe." How wonderful it would be, Orlando thought, if one of these poems could magically find its way to Rosalind. Magic indeed. In another part of the forest, Rosalind, dressed in boy's clothing, was plucking one of Orlando's poems from a tree trunk. So remember, everyone's in the forest together, and so Rosalind did end up finding Orlando's poems. "Let no face be kept in mind," she read, "but the fair of Rosalind." Celia approached and dangled another poem before Rosalind's nose. "Dost thou not wonder how thy name should be hanged and carved upon these trees?" she asked. "It is young Orlando that tripped up the wrestler's heels and your heart both in an instant." Orlando! Rosalind looked in horror at her male clothing. "Alas! What shall I do with my doublet and hose?" So she's saying, how is Orlando supposed to recognize her if she looks like a man? Just then, Orlando passed near with Jacques. The two were discussing love, which Jacques dismissed. "The worst fault you have is to be in love," the melancholy lord declared. Rosalind and Celia scrambled to hide behind a tree. Orlando was as handsome as Rosalind remembered. Even now, he was praising her to his companion. Still, Rosalind couldn't help but wonder whether Orlando's love was true. He did write wonderful love poems, but then again, they hardly knew each other. Would he even recognize her if he saw her under these changed circumstances? And how could Rosalind find out how deeply she loved Orlando? So, all very valid concerns, right? She's wondering if Orlando would even recognize her because she's dressed like a boy right now. Rosalind laughed at the plan that sprung to mind. "I will speak to him like a saucy lackey," she whispered to Celia, "and under that habit play the knave with him." She would get to know Orlando better and test the sincerity of his devotion. Straightening her doublet, Rosalind stepped out from behind the tree. "Do you hear, Forester?" she called, deepening her voice. Orlando, having just parted company with the lord, turned around to see a fine-featured lad beckoning him. "There is a man haunts the forest that abuses our young plants with carving Rosalind on their barks," Rosalind said. "If I could meet that fancy monger, I would give him some good counsel, for he seems to have the fever of love upon him." So Rosalind, dressed as a boy, is saying, "Do you know who's been carving this name Rosalind in all these trees and ruining these trees? Because I want to talk to him right now." "I am he that is so love-shaked," Orlando admitted. "I pray you, tell me your remedy. Did you ever cure any so?" So he's saying, I am in love and I don't know what to do about it. How do you make it stop? And Rosalind says, "Yes, one, and in this manner," Rosalind said. "He was to imagine me his love. I would now like him, then loathe him, now entertain him, then forswear him, now weep for him, then spit at him. Thus would I cure you too, if you would but call me Rosalind, and come every day to woo me." So she's saying, I'll help cure your love sickness if you pretend that I'm Rosalind, and you come and try and gain my affection by wooing me, right? And remember, Rosalind is dressed like a boy, so Orlando thinks that a boy is telling him all this. Orlando considered this strange proposal. He did not wish to be cured of his love for Rosalind, but this would give him a chance to practice wooing her. Besides, this boy seemed like jolly company, and everyone else in the Duke's court was tired of hearing about his beloved, and in some strange way the boy even looked like fair Rosalind. Orlando smiled. "Now, by the faith of my love, I will, good youth." So he even admitted to himself that the boy even looks a little bit like Rosalind. Because it is, right? It's her in disguise. The impish maiden in boy's clothing laughed. "Nay, you must call me Rosalind," she said. For the next few days, Rosalind enjoyed pretending to be Ganymede, pretending to be Rosalind. It gave her license to say and ask many things that a proper young lady never could. The more Rosalind came to know Orlando, the more she liked him. He had only one fault that irked her. Orlando was never on time for their meetings. If he could not honor these little commitments, could she count on him to honor a marriage? Still, whenever he at last arrived, Rosalind found it hard to stay angry. She eagerly fell into their role-playing. "Am I not your Rosalind?" she asked. Orlando laughed. "I take some joy to say you are, because I would be talking of her." So he's saying he likes pretending that she's Rosalind. Rosalind crossed her arms. "Well, in her person I say I will not have you." So she's saying, well, me pretending to be Rosalind, I'm telling you that Rosalind would not have you right now. "I would not have my real Rosalind of this mind," Orlando cried, "for I protect her from for I protest her frown might kill me." So he's saying if Rosalind looks mad at me, I would die because she can never be mad at me. Rosalind laughed at Orlando's melodramatic response, so he's being very dramatic. "Men have died from time to time and worms have eaten them," she said, "but not for love." So she's saying you won't die because of love. At this, Orlando clapped his hat on his head and bowed. "I must attend the Duke at dinner. By 2 o'clock I will be with thee again." Rosalind frowned. "If you come 1 minute behind your hour, I will think you the most pathetical break promise and the most hollow lover. Therefore, keep your promise." "With no less religion than if thou were indeed my Rosalind," Orlando swore. Orlando disappeared into the woods. Rosalind sighed. 2 hours later, Celia found Rosalind still sighing in that same spot. Okay, we're going to pause here, you guys, because we're almost out of time. We will continue in the next part, with the next part in the next video. See you next time.